Welcome. This presentation will provide an overview of the City of Oakland's General Plan update process, its purpose, phases, and issues that will be addressed in this planning effort. We'll also talk about how we're engaging the community and how you can provide your input. The City of Oakland is required by statute to adopt and update its general plan. Many of the elements in the current general plan were last updated over 20 years ago. But what is a general plan, and how does the general plan impact Oakland? The general plan is a guiding document for the city. It provides a consistent direction for future development and is an opportunity to engage our community in the planning and decision-making process. The general plan establishes a citywide vision and supporting goals, policies, and implementation measures around the following: the equitable location and development of housing, open space, the number and quality of parks and recreational spaces, the built environment, transportation, how people get around, especially bicyclists, children, persons with disabilities, pedestrians, and seniors. It also impacts who's able to stay and thrive in this economy. The general plan also provides an opportunity to engage our communities in the planning and decision-making process and helps reduce racial inequities. As noted earlier, most of the city's current general plan was developed over 20 years ago. With this comprehensive update of the general plan, the city has a once-in-a-generation opportunity to advance its commitment to create a fair and just city through equitable goals, policies, and implementation measures. This general plan update will be conducted using a racial equity lens to identify the racial and equity impacts of the proposed policies and programs to identify more equitable approaches. You may be wondering, yes, this is the general plan for Oakland, but how does it affect me? The general plan is a plan for the city as a whole, but it's also a plan for your neighborhood. Think about the things you experience in your neighborhood every day. What are some things that would make daily life a little easier? What brings you joy in your neighborhood? And what does your neighborhood need the most right now? Think, too, about the things that might change in your community. 20 years from now, we'll all be older. How can our neighborhood support our aging parents? If you have kids, what do you want them to look forward to in Oakland when they're adults? This general plan update is a 5-year planning process and will take place in 2 phases. State law not only requires specific topics or elements to be covered in a general plan, but also requires some to be adopted by early 2023. In the first phase, we will adopt the housing, safety, and environmental justice elements. State law requires cities to prepare regular updates to their housing elements to address the housing needs of residents in all income levels, including housing that's affordable to seniors, families, and workers. Let's dive into what topics we need to address in the near term: housing, safety, and environmental justice. Everyone in Oakland can see and feel the effects of the housing crisis. Homelessness, displacement, and housing affordability are major issues. To address these complex issues, the housing element needs to do 3 things. Help Oakland produce more housing, especially housing that's affordable for lower-income people. Protect tenants and help keep people in their homes. And keep existing stock of affordable homes affordable. The housing element must also show how Oakland will meet the housing needs of residents at all income levels, including affordable housing for seniors, families, and workers, and meet the city's regional housing need allocation over the next 8-year cycle. The safety element identifies natural and human-made hazards like wildfire, earthquakes, climate change, flooding, evacuation, and hazardous materials, and ways to reduce impacts. The City of Oakland amended the safety element in 2021 with the adoption of the 2021 through 2026 Local Hazard Mitigation Plan. That plan identifies potential natural hazards and their impacts to people, property, and the environment, and corresponding actions to reduce those impacts. The environmental justice element is a new requirement under state law which requires the city to identify environmental justice communities, often referred to as disadvantaged communities, and identify policies and programs to reduce the unique or compounded health risks in environmental justice communities by decreasing pollution exposure, increasing community assets, and improving overall community health. Some topics required as part of the environmental justice element include pollution exposure, including air quality, water quality, and land use compatibility, access to public facilities, food access, safe and sanitary homes, including housing location, quality, and affordability, physical activity, including accessibility to public transit, employment and services, additional unique or compounded health risks, including climate vulnerability, like high fire threat areas, areas prone to flooding from sea level rise, or seismic risk areas, civic or community engagement, and prioritization of improvements for disadvantaged communities. These elements also overlap. Housing quality and stability is addressed in both the housing and environmental justice elements. Keeping housing safe from earthquakes, flooding, and fires is a housing and safety issue. And addressing the needs of those who will be most vulnerable to safety issues is an environmental justice topic. In the second phase of the General Plan update, we will update the open space, conservation and recreation element, noise element, and the land use and transportation element. State law also gives cities the option to include any other topic as an element. Here in Oakland, in Phase 2, we will also be creating a new infrastructure and facilities element. Even though the update is happening in 2 phases, work happening in Phase 1 will inform Phase 2. Community engagement for the General Plan update is a key component of this effort and is designed to be extensive and inclusive. The community engagement approach for the update involves a very close coordination between the city, our technical consultant, and our community consultant. Our community consultant team has partnerships with several community-based organizations who represent important communities in Oakland and who have been historically excluded from traditional planning processes. They're doing much of this work already. There will be several types of community engagement throughout the year through pop-ups, cultural events, town halls, neighborhood workshops and meetings, online engagement, and presentations to community groups and neighborhood councils, as well as public hearings. All designed to engage and solicit your input and guidance on actions that will further fair housing, increase community assets, decrease pollution exposure, and improve overall community health. All community input shared will be used to ground truth data provided by people's lived experiences and inform areas of focus for our General Plan elements, as well as guide the development of the General Plan's policies. The General Plan Update team includes the Deeply Rooted Collaborative, a partnership with 13 community-based organizations conducting General Plan community engagement activities for Oakland's most impacted residents. This includes working-class communities, communities of color, the unhoused, the formerly incarcerated, undocumented folks, youth, and communities who are experiencing environmental injustice. Over the next 4 years, we'll be conducting about 100 engagement activities ranging from large cultural hub events with music and performance to smaller pop-up events at parks to make sure that Oakland residents are able to share their issues, solutions, and visions for our city's future. The Deeply Rooted Collaborative will also provide information on various city services and resources to address Oakland residents' immediate needs. Through this update, we're asking and trying to answer big questions about Oakland's future and what you want to see. The project team has produced background documents that tell us a little bit about what some of the big issues are in Oakland. These documents include a map atlas that covers all the topics in a general plan, and an environmental justice and racial equity baseline that tell us about how different racial and ethnic groups are affected differently by these issues. They're available on the General Plan Update website for your review. This map shows existing, on-the-ground land uses throughout the city of Oakland. Right now, the majority of land use is residential, shown in yellow and orange, and makes up about 38% of the city. Most of this is single-family residential, but the orange shows you where it's denser. Much of Oakland's land use pattern was driven by history, with early development happening in West Oakland, around the port and the old train routes, as well as in downtown, which has a mix of land uses now. On the map, you can also see a lot of red and pink. That's commercial, office, and mixed use, along major corridors like International, Fruitvale, Foothill, and Telegraph and Broadway. You can also see purple along the shoreline. That's the Port of Oakland's land use, along with industrial land use. Some of these are bumped up right next to residential uses. Scattered throughout the city, you can see greens and blues. Those are parks and educational facilities. The big question for land use now is, how can we plan for Oakland's land uses to support your vision for the future? Think about your neighborhood. How far do you have to go to run your errands, to go shopping, to go out to a restaurant, to go to school, or to get to your job? If you're thinking about what your neighborhood looks like, or how to make Oakland resilient to climate change, or what the new jobs of the future might look like, then you're thinking about land use. We know that housing need, affordability, and gentrification and displacement are serious issues here in Oakland. As housing production has lagged, the ability of both renters and owners to find housing affordable to their incomes has continued to decline. According to 2018 data from the Urban Displacement Project, nearly half of all households in Oakland live in tracts at risk of experiencing gentrification, and almost 25% live in tracts susceptible to or experiencing displacement now. One of the directives of the housing element is to take meaningful actions that address disparities in housing needs and in access to opportunity, replacing segregated living patterns with truly integrated and balanced living patterns, transforming racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty into areas of opportunity. One of the big questions the General Plan must answer is, how can Oakland address its housing needs and keep people in their homes? We talked about land use. What should go where to help us create the Oakland we want to see? But another key piece is that of circulation or mobility, or the flow of people, cars and vehicles, planes and trains, buses and transit, bikes and goods from one place to another, near and far. There are some big plans in the works, including improvements to aid with goods movement, changing arrangements of streets so that all types of transportation can share the road, making roads more resilient to sea level rise, improving transit, and creating new greenways and trails. Think about how you get around, especially throughout the city or to other places in the Bay Area. What big transportation improvements will help people and goods get around? Planning for people walking and bicycling has changed significantly since Oakland's first land use element in 1998. 71% of bike infrastructure was built in the last 20 years, with nearly 300 more miles planned. This map shows where existing bike routes exist throughout the city. More recent planning efforts have been shaped by a new focus on health, equity, and safety, addressing the fact that not all of Oakland enjoys the same level of bike and pedestrian infrastructure, safety, and comfort. So the big question is, how can the city make it safer, more accessible, and convenient for all Oaklanders to get around by bike or on foot? Like many California cities, Oakland experiences its share of environmental hazards, like wildfire, flooding, and earthquakes. Some of these hazards are likely to get even worse with climate change. Here on this map, we can see areas at very high risk of wildfire, up in the hills, in close proximity to a fault line, this gray shadow, in the floodplain, in blue, and areas that might experience liquefaction, which is when solids behave like liquids during an earthquake. Do you know how you would evacuate during an emergency? Do you know any of the risks where you live? What about during a heat wave? The big question is, how and where should Oakland be planning for these hazards? Environmental justice is a big part of the General Plan update. It's about improving the environmental health of those most impacted by pollution burdens and intentionally investing in these communities to create opportunities that will allow its residents to live long, healthy lives. Cal EnviroScreen is a tool that the state of California uses to measure environmental burden using indicators like air and water pollution and proximity to hazardous waste, along with things that make people vulnerable to pollution's effects, including things like asthma rates, poverty levels, and language isolation. This tool layers factors together on top of one another and scores all of California's tracts of land. The higher the score, the more impacted a community is. Using these methods, all but 2 tracts of land touching the I-880 are the most burdened in the state of California. The big question is, how can we make Oakland more environmentally just so that no place is affected by an unfair environmental burden? Your neighborhood also has a big impact on your health. It's often been said that zip code is sometimes more important than your genetic code. In Oakland, life expectancy can vary by nearly 20 years from one census tract to another. This is what's known as a health inequity, differences in health outcomes that are the result of systemic, avoidable, and unjust social and economic policies and practices that create barriers to opportunity. In looking forward, Oakland must look back at the history of unjust planning that led to differences in neighborhood conditions that affect their health. Think about the things that keep you healthy in your neighborhood. Can you walk around safely? Do you have good access to healthy food? Do you feel secure in your home? All of these questions are part of this big one. How can we improve health and overcome health inequity for all of Oakland's communities? Thanks for listening to this presentation. We want you to be involved and have your voice heard in shaping the future of Oakland. Please sign up for project updates at this link and check out our website for more information.